this episode of Grief in Common, we mention suicide, brain tumours, and talk about death throughout. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Winston's Grief in Common podcast. This is the second season, which is really exciting, and the podcast focuses on young people talking about their experiences of grief. Today's episode is going to focus on losing someone when you were young, and the experiences around that, feelings around key milestones. So a bit of background on me. If you didn't listen to the previous season where I did a couple of episodes, I lost my dad when I was 5 years old. He took his own life, and I've been speaking about my experience of that. And today I'm joined by Teigan. So thanks so much for speaking with me. Do you mind just sharing a bit about your story?
Hi everyone, my name's Teigan. And my mum passed away when I was 11 of a brain tumour. And similar to Maya, I've just been quite passionate as I've got older about grief advocacy, and kind of wanting to share my story and make grief less of a taboo. So I'm really excited to be here to talk with Maya today.
Thanks so much for sharing, Teigan. So I'm just wondering, I think the main thing when you lose someone when you're younger, you go through key milestones in life that person isn't there for. And the kind of feelings around that. Have you kind of experienced that since losing your mum?
Yeah, I would say because my mum died when I was 11, it was kind of already, I was just finishing primary school. And I remember the first kind of big thing is I did my year 6, I don't know if you did one, but year 6 play. And I remember that she wasn't there for that. And I remember looking out to the audience and going, this is weird. This is the first thing my mum's missing. Obviously, I guess that's kind of a minor one in the scheme of things, because now I'm 21 and I went to secondary school. My mum wasn't there. Finished secondary school, went to sixth form. She wasn't there. Now I'm at university. So I feel like even if you're measuring things by education, that's already quite a lot of milestones. What about you? Has that kind of been similar?
Yeah, and I think in a way as well with milestones, especially when you're younger, it's almost like less the milestone itself and more the fact that you can see other people there with both their parents. So it's a year 6 play is quite a big thing to you when you're in year 6. Obviously in the scheme of your life, maybe not so big, but having that experience of seeing everyone else there with, their parents or their mum there to support them and not having that must be really difficult. I think for me, I've started noticing it more as I've gotten older, because I lost my dad when I was 5, so I feel like it got normal quite quickly. There was one sports day that I remember being really difficult because we found out that he died on a sports day, so sports day then became a really difficult day. But again, that's not so much the event, but the fact that it's linked to a really horrible memory. But then I kind of got used to him not being there for future things. But then weirdly, it was my brother's graduation that really got me, because I didn't have a normal one because COVID. So I didn't really notice it too much then. But me and my mum both got to go see my brother graduate last summer. And it really bothered me then that my dad wasn't there. I was almost annoyed that he wasn't there, to see my brother go through that. It was such an achievement for him. So I think weirdly it's kind of been as I've gotten a bit older.
Yeah, I know what you mean about getting older. I also think when you are that young, and you were 5, so that's even longer before I experienced it, but I think you kind of measure things by time as well. I know that's a massive thing for me, is time really freaks me out. The idea of obviously the older you get, the further away from that person. I feel that with my mum. I feel like further away from her, and you kind of measure things. Everything is measured by age and time, and especially, I don't know if you have this, I think when you lose someone when you're a child, I just have this ticking timeline in my head of every anniversary. So for me, this year it's going to be 10 years, and 10 years is seems really massive. And then I know next year, because she died when I was 11, and if it's 11 years, that means I've lived longer without her than with her. I don't know if you kind of have that with your dad as well.
Yeah, it's a really weird feeling, and especially since because I only had him for like 5 years. So it didn't actually really take too long as well for it to get to the point where I'd kind of lived longer without him than with him. And I kind of know what you mean because I think in a way as well, I feel like, and this might sound really stupid, but I feel like I'm almost like less entitled to grieve like the longer time passes. Because obviously, in like the couple of years, like that immediate period after you lose someone, it feels kind of like valid, like, yeah, I'm going to be upset and, this and that. But then it's like, I mean, how long is it for me now? It's going to be 20 years next year, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, like I almost feel like, if I'm still getting upset about it, like why am I still getting upset about it? It's been 20 years. I think maybe it's like partly the assumption that people think you should be over it at that point, but obviously you're not. And I completely get what you mean about like it feels like it was so long ago now. And like it's a period of my life that obviously I don't want to go back to, but it's also a period that he was there for.
It's interesting what you say about feeling entitled to still be sad or still to grieve, because that's something I've noticed as time's gone on and I've gotten older. And actually, with being older and living your life, you're going to actually meet people that are being bereaved a bit later on. So people that have maybe just lost a parent at sort of in their 20s. And it's also this weird feeling, and it sounds really weird, but of a bit of jealousy that it's such an odd feeling, and it's very obviously complex, and you feel bad for feeling that way. But what I mean by it is they've just lost that person and they're in that early stage of grief where it's okay for them to be sad. And I sometimes feel exactly what you were saying, that why am I still sad about this? Or for me it's Mother's Day. And I know every Mother's Day I feel like as it builds up, maybe it's similar for you on Father's Day, this sort of weird feeling. And then on the day, if I feel sad, I'm almost like, well, I can't really tell anyone because, she died 10 years ago. So why am I still sad about it? And I think I've even been to grief events, and it actually really freaked me out because I was meeting people that had just been bereaved. And I just felt like I can't actually relate to you because, one, you've just been bereaved at the age of... I think it was a lady who was about in her 40s. So we're already far apart in terms of relating to each other. And also she was just bereaved just then. So I was like, I've lived with it. And I think living with grief is very different to someone who's just experienced a death. And I know that that's something I've really struggled with as I've gotten older. And I think it will just be something, again, probably similar to you, that I will always experience when you come into contact with more people. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Because I lost my dad when I was so young, I feel like I'm going to say that so many times in this podcast, but I feel like this is going to sound crazy, but I almost missed out on that period of like really feeling the grief because I was so young. I don't think I was like, you don't process things like you would if you lose someone when you're older. Like when you lose someone when you're older, you're like rational about it. And obviously it's horrendous, but I feel like the main thing is like you have all those memories, you know exactly what it is that you're feeling because you're feeling sad or you're feeling angry. But when you lose someone as a child, it's like all these really confusing emotions that you've not necessarily felt before. And you just kind of have to come to terms with it. And I feel like a lot of my grief when I was younger was like, from what my mum's told me, was more kind of, she said I would have a lot of nightmares, or me and my brother wouldn't eat, or we'd be ill, but that was like the grief coming out. So I almost in a way feel like I've missed out on that period of just like really crying, just like I feel terrible about all this because it was such a confusing, odd time. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if, because kind of similar to me, because I think I just couldn't really grieve my mum's death when I was 11. Like obviously I felt sad and I knew that she died and that was awful, but I kind of know what you mean. It's weird. I feel like childhood grief is so strange, and I was going to ask you this because I kind of experienced this. Do you feel in your life so far there was sort of like another time in your life as you got older where suddenly it kind of hit you again and you almost felt, hang on, this didn't just happen for you when you were 5 years old, this is gonna affect me for the rest of my life? Was there sort of a time in your life where maybe you've experienced kind of like a secondary grief, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think I get it in waves. I feel like I can pin it to a certain point, but I'll just get ran, and it won't be frequent. It'll maybe be like, I don't know, once every 6 months, if that. But I'll just feel like really awful. Everything's just terrible, and I'll just like cry loads. But it is kind of like cathartic in a way. Like I don't necessarily feel better afterwards, but I feel like I've let something out, if you know what I mean. Um, but yeah, I think it just comes every now and then because it was so long ago. I don't necessarily even, and that sounds awful, but I don't think about him every day. Like you probably would if you'd lost someone really recently. Like long periods of time can pass without me thinking of him, or I'll just think of him because something's reminded me of whatever. But there will just be those periods, and they do come completely out of the blue as well. My partner or like whoever I'm with will be like, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" And I'm just like, it's really hard to put something to it as well because like you're just feeling terrible. But yeah, I mean, did you feel the same? Like, was there like a period in your life where you kind of had that realization?
Yeah, I think obviously I think I also get the waves randomly because I also think that's just grief is something that you kind of live with and it's always gonna it's like this moving thing that kind of moves with you through life. Personally for me, it was kind of to do with COVID, which isn't really a surprise. But lockdown, I think, because I had to be, inside with my thoughts. And I think my family, especially my dad, since my mum died, was always like, we have to go and do everything we can in life and like make the most of it. So we've always been quite like a go, do crazy things, go on holiday, do all this stuff. And I feel like it was the first time I'd been forced to like actually sit down with this massive thing. And I was about 18 at the time. And I think I just felt like she just died. It was so odd. But obviously my family and the people around me were just really confused because obviously she died when I was 11. And it was just really strange. And I remember, yeah, just feeling really awful and sad and feel like I was grieving again because it felt a bit like, oh, hang on, this didn't just happen when I was 11. Like, this is for the rest of my life. And I think it kind of links to the idea of milestones and time, that not only did that person die when we were young, we're always going to be constantly reminded. It's something you have to live with and grow with. And like you're saying, when you're just upset and there's not always a direct reason, or or people don't really understand that, because I know that I'll just be talking to my friends and someone will maybe mention their mum one time and it wouldn't even upset me. And then another time I think I remember really specifically, like I was in the car with my friend and their mum and they picked us up or something. And I remember being in the back of the car like, oh my God, I'm going to start crying just because of that reminder. So yeah, I think COVID was, not great in terms of that. I think it just really hit me again. But I also relate to the kind of always, every now and then sort of wave of grief.
Maybe that's because it's only what 6 years between when I lost my dad and you lost your mum. But I don't know. I feel like so much of my grief, I always attribute, whatever the word is. I always attribute it to something else. And then if I go back and think about it, I'm like, actually, if I think about it, that was probably about my dad. Because it's funny you mentioned COVID, because I went through a breakup in the first lockdown. I think, didn't we all? Seems like everyone did. Um, but it hadn't even necessarily been, like that long of a relationship. It wasn't necessarily like really super serious one. But I was like distraught. I was like, I think I cried more than I did probably when my dad died. And in hindsight, I think there was probably more going on there. And it's the same kind of thing where I'd kind of been like left alone with my thoughts. And yeah, I wasn't doing well. And it was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And yeah, it was just an opportunity to get all that emotion out, I think. But it's interesting that you mentioned, like, I think it's the concept of growing up with grief that is like so different to, like, if I'd lost someone. I'm 24 now. If I lost somebody now, the way I would react to it would be completely different, I think. But it's also a byproduct of it is that things become like normal to you that people might not see as normal, because if you say to them, I've got a parent that's died, it sounds awful. But there are some things that just become like usual. Like it's Father's Day. I don't know when Father's Day is actually. I don't know, June. But like it never actually bothers me anymore. Because I people that I'm with are like, like, are you feeling okay? It's Father's Day. Like, do you want to do anything? But I don't sometimes get it. I don't think of it. It doesn't necessarily make me feel sad just because it's been so long now. I don't know if you've had any kind of similar experiences with that.
Yeah, I also think some years it's just not going to bother you, and then sometimes it will. Yeah, like some Mother's Day, I'm like, you know what, I'm just not really bothered by it. It doesn't actually upset me. And then it's just weird how sometimes it will really, really upset me. It's interesting saying a parent died is massive, because it is massive, but then it does become the norm. I think you're so right. Like I've said, my mum died so many times now, and sometimes I think, I don't know if you have this, where I'll say that and I forget that the magnitude that maybe that carries to other people. I don't know, I think because as I've done more grief advocacy and talking about it, certain things to me that I think I've just either processed or said so many times, they don't seem as big anymore. I forget to other people that's quite a big thing to say. And I've noticed I've said things and then other people will get upset at what I'm saying. And I find it strange. I'm like, well, that's fine to me. Like, I can say that.
No, I know exactly what you mean, and I think maybe that's the difference in that you've done some more of this grief advocacy stuff. I just find it unbearable, like when people ask me about it. But I have been getting better since, like doing all the Winston's Wish stuff, doing the podcast stuff. So it's really good that it helps in that way. But like before, if people would like, because when people, because some people don't know, they just don't know, so they'll point blank ask you a question about like your parents or your dad or whatever, and I would just be like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable. And I think they can probably sense my awkwardness, and then that makes them feel awkward, and the whole conversation is then just awkward. But like, I would just kind of not comment on it, or I wouldn't lie, but like when I was younger, one of my colleagues was like, "Oh, Father's Day is coming up. Remember to get a card." And I could have said then, "Oh, well, actually, like my dad's dead." But in my head, I was like, "No, that would be awful." So I was just like, "Oh, yeah," knowing that, like, I didn't have anyone to buy for. But I think I'm getting much better at that. But it's so tricky. I just find it tricky not to get awkward with that stuff. Growing up with it, things becoming normal. I don't know if it's the same for you. There's like guilt that comes with that, because like I don't miss him sometimes. In general, I don't really feel like I miss him at all, because I feel like I didn't know him long enough to miss him in a way. So like I feel sad because sometimes I'm like, I don't have a dad, and that's really sad. And I go, wish he was here, and I wish he was here to see this or that. But I don't really miss him because I almost don't have enough memories to miss him. But then that makes me feel really guilty, because it sounds insane to say that you don't really miss like your dead father. But I feel like people expect you, when you've lost someone, to like be sad more or like feel a certain way about certain things. But like it's just so normal now. Like I've had so long without him that I just don't feel that way. But then I feel like I should be. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the guilt thing's quite a big one. Yeah, I think I've noticed recently, because this year, weirdly, I've just kind of weirdly felt okay about it. I think, I don't know about my mum, I mean, and I also go through periods of time where I don't think about her, or, yeah, I'm not sad as much as maybe I was like a couple of years ago. But then I get this like guilt thing where it's like, hang on, like in my head, it's like I'm a voice in my head saying, well, why are you not thinking about her? Like, that's wrong. Like, you don't want to forget about her. And I think because for me, it is quite a big fear that, I don't know if you have this as well, but that people would forget about her. I almost feel like I'm the one. And because I do all this grief advocacy stuff, I'm like, I'm the one that should be remembering her. But I think it's like, yeah, you've got to remember that at the end of the day, you've got to live your life. And because it did happen when we were so young, it's only natural that you're going to maybe forget some things about them or not think about them as much. Because I think I have a similar thing where people, maybe they'll ask me about her or want me to talk about something about her personality. And I'm like, well, at the end of the day, I only knew her for 11 years. So I'm not going to know her in the way I would know her if I was an adult, because I didn't have adult mother-daughter relationship. I was always a child when I knew her. So how am I going to... I knew her as my mum, probably the same way you knew your dad as your dad. So it's tricky because then you then feel guilty because you didn't really get to know them. And I think that in itself is kind of a grief. You kind of mourn the relationship you could have had with them, or you mourn them as a person. It's like you're mourning, oh yeah, you lost your dad, or I lost my mum. But it's like I'm also mourning Amber, who my mum was. I don't know if you kind of have a similar thing.
No, I know exactly what you mean because I feel like this is something that's maybe happened more to my brother as well. I don't know if that's just because, like, two blokes, but I feel like we've both almost become like more interested in him since we got older. Because it's like you were saying, like when you're a kid, that's just like your parent, and like that's their role, that's their personality, is just like parent. But when you get older, obviously, like your relationship with your parent changes. Like, me and my mum are more like friends now, like I don't live with her anymore. So she's less of that mum figure and more just someone that I like really enjoy spending time with. But yeah, then it's tricky like thinking about what that could have been like if he was still here. And I think both me and my brother have sort of been asking, like, did he like this when he was our age? Like, did he ever do stuff like this? Like, did he go traveling? I think he lived in Spain for a year, and I only found that out like a few months ago, and I was like, what? That's so cool. And like even like naughty stuff that they got up to, like did he ever have like crazy nights out? Did he ever, I don't know, do drugs, like stuff like that? But it just kind of is natural to start wondering those kind of things when you get older, because like I don't know the answer. He was just dad for 5 years, but obviously before that, and when my mum knew him, he was like this whole other person. In a way, I almost feel like more connected to him as I get older and like find out more about him. But then it is like it's bittersweet because I would love to know him now and like have that kind of relationship, but I can't.
I think it's interesting as you get old, as you get older, you want to know more about them, because I think I had exactly the same thing with my mum. And I think a massive thing that I kind of went through was about like my identity and like your parents and how much of you they make up. And I used to have this massive thing where I freaked out, like I didn't look like my mum at all because she was blonde and had blue eyes, and I was like, oh my god, like I look nothing like her. And it kind of, yeah, I don't know, it just weirdly worried me, and I just wanted to know so much about her. But obviously the only person that can tell you the most about them is them, and they're not there. But do you ever feel like, oh, am I always going to be, I don't know, like the girl whose dad died, and is this always going to be a part of who I am? But also, would I have been a completely different person if it hadn't have happened to me? Because I feel like that's kind of something that you go through when you sort of live and grow up with grief.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because that's the thing. Like, if I was to lose him now, I've already like become who I am. Like, I've already got like my personality traits, like whatever. But when you lose someone when you're younger, like it kind of acts on you in ways that you don't realize. And like for me, like and I think I've spoken about this before, so people are probably sick of hearing it. But in like relationships and stuff, I don't think I would be the way I am in relationships if it wasn't for losing him. Because there's just always like a big part of me that is terrified of like losing somebody else. And I recently keep worrying about that with my brother as well. Like I'm just like so terrified that something will happen to him. But I think, well, I know, like I don't think I would be like that if my dad hadn't died. So it's kind of infuriating because it's really tricky and you don't want to have to worry about people all the time. But then at the same time, I think it probably weirdly had some benefits. Like, I think I probably grew up quite quickly. I'd like to think that it's made me like a little bit more understanding, like a bit more empathic, empathetic, whichever of those words. But do you know what I mean? Like, although it was a terrible, terrible thing, and it's definitely still affecting me now, there are parts of me that I think I'm the way I am because of that, and they're not necessarily bad things. How do you feel like it's been with you?
Yeah, I agree about being empathetic, I think. But then that's also like a worry, because I always think, oh, if that hadn't have happened to me, would I just not be as empathetic as I am now? Because I think I'd also like to think that it's almost a weirdly a skill that it's given me to be able to talk to other people about maybe their problems, or especially if the topic of grief and death comes up. I think it's made me more inclined to want to help people and make people feel okay with talking about it. And obviously, if my mum hadn't have died, like that's something that I know it would be different. It's weird. It's like, who would I be if that hadn't have happened to me, and would I be a completely different person?
Yeah, you are kind of grieving for a person that like you're grieving for yourself in a way, and I think that's the thing. There's all this like inner child stuff now, but like it is true because we were both so young. Like I don't want to be dramatic, but like in a sense, a part of us did die. When that all happened, and I think it's fair enough to like dwell on that a little bit and be like, I think it's just natural to kind of question a parallel universe situation. Like I always think, well, if he was alive, like what would happen? What would the situation be like? What would I be doing? Like, would my life have taken a completely different path because I wouldn't have done this, or that? When it's a parent as well, I think it's like not having that second opinion on things because like my mum is amazing. I absolutely love her, but like she's had to be like mum and dad for years, which she's done an absolutely amazing job on. But it's like it's funny little things like, if I bring a boyfriend home, she has her opinion on them, but I'm like, well, what would my dad think of them? And I'll never know. It's really annoying. I don't know if you've felt the same.
Yeah, it's really funny what you say about how that parent becomes mum and dad, because I think I'm quite lucky as well that my dad's been pretty good. And I also think because of that, he's actually become more like sensitive and emotional. Obviously, that's a massive stereotype of dads, and I'm not saying that all dads have to be that way or not that way. And I think that's also a dynamic in itself, is like growing up with one parent and having not the other opinion. And I also especially think when obviously that parent was there and now they're not there, that parent also has to learn how to be a single parent, and it's very obviously really hard for them. And it's kind of again something that you realise when you've gotten older. You're like, wow, that was like really must have been really hard for that parent, which sounds obviously ridiculous because obviously it's hard, but when you're 5 or 11, you're not even thinking what's that parent going through. I don't know, I kind of feel like it's made me like really proud of my dad in a weird way. I know that's probably quite a condescending way to put it, but just or quite amazed at how he's been able to, because I've got a brother as well, bring up 2 children on his own. It's probably the same for you with your mum.
Yeah, and I don't think it's condescending at all. I think which is terrible, but I think it's only like in the last couple of years where maybe since like I've probably moved out, like not just uni, but I've got like the boring 9 to 5 job and go to work, coming home, and I'm like, oh, I have to cook something again. But like she had to do that every single day for like 2 kids while she was like grieving. And for her, it was like the different kind of grief to what we've had, where it was sudden and she'd known that person for ages and all of that kind of stuff, which must have just been awful. And like she just managed to keep going. And I don't know how she did it, but I feel like as a child, like you can't help it, but you just are really selfish. Because, I was 5 years old. I was probably just focused on like, what am I going to eat tonight? I want to play with this, or like I want to go and do that. Because it's the same kind of thing where like it got normal so quickly. I don't that's kind of what I remember from my childhood. Like looking back on my childhood, I feel like I had a great one, which, considering what happened, I feel like is amazing to be able to say. And that was like so much down to her, but I can't even imagine how tough it must have been dealing with us just as normal kids, but then also having our like highs and lows because of what happened. I just am amazed at her. And I feel bad because I feel like I don't express it nearly enough, but I hope she knows.
Yeah, I think it's hard to, because obviously everything's relative, so it's hard to like know when to express your gratitude for the other parent, I guess. But because also I guess with the parent thing, it's like they actually knew them as who they were, like because they're an adult and they know. And I remember thinking, like, I'm kind of sometimes envious of my dad for that. Like, he actually, you know, he got to know my mum as who she was. Yeah, I don't know why I'm saying that, but yeah.
Because it's just like really tiny comments. Like if we watch a film or like if we hear a song and mum will be like, "Oh, that was your dad's favorite song," or like he really liked this film, and I'll kind of be like, oh, I just don't know. Like I wouldn't know any of this stuff unless she told me, and I'm kind of jealous because like she knew so much more about like his character. But yeah, it's still nice like hearing those things, even now. But it's like bittersweet again, where it's like I wish he could just be there to tell me those things himself. But yeah, what can you do? But I know exactly what you mean.
It's also like nice when my dad maybe says things that he sees in me and my brother that like I like my mum. I don't know, I always really like it when he says those things. It's like quite a nice, like comforting thing to know.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, like I've seen baby pictures and stuff like that. Like there is no point from baby to now where I looked remotely like my dad, which is kind of annoying. But my brother is like he's literally spitting image. Like since he's gotten older, like probably the last couple of years, like if you saw photos of them next to each other, it's like crazy. But I don't know how he feels about that. Yeah, it's frustrating not having any of those similarities with him kind of looks wise, but there are some things where my mum's like, that's so your dad, or, that's something he would have done or said. It's like part of him kind of carrying on, even though it might not feel like it sometimes. Like she obviously sees that, which is really nice.
Yeah, my brother's literally looks like my mum and I look like my dad. So it's kind of the same thing where, yeah, my brother's got like my mum's colouring, so she had like blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm like the complete opposite of that. And it's kind of, that's also interesting when you have a sibling, I think, to kind of how they feel about that and how you feel about that in terms of the parent that you've lost.
Well, thanks so much for speaking to me today, Teigan. It's been so interesting and just amazing hearing you share your story, and really interesting as well just to see like the similarities that we've both had, even though there's that 6-year gap, so much of our experiences are in common from losing someone at a young age. So thank you so much for sharing with me.
Thank you, Maya, as well. I don't know, it's just really nice to speak about these things and feel like someone relates to you, as you say, even if it's a different parent and a different death and a different timeline. It's just, I don't know, it makes you feel less alone in your grief. So thank you very much as well.
This podcast is brought to you by Talk Grief, powered by Winston's Wish, the UK's first children and young people's bereavement charity.
Listen to young people from different backgrounds have honest conversations about their grief and experiences.
You might hear us laugh, cry, and everything in between.
We hope that these conversations give you the confidence to talk about your own grief.
If you're grieving and over the age of 13, this podcast is suitable for you, and we hope it helps you feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to young professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common. Thank you.